Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to Moving Beyond Burnout. Today we are going to be recapping quarter one. So I can't believe we've already come to the end of the first quarter of the year. And I want to talk about it. I want to talk about some of the common struggles that people are having as it relates to burnout and stress from this quarter, and to also hear from you. So if you're joining me for the first time, please like the video. Please share the video with other people who you know might really gain something from this topic today. And then if you're joining me on YouTube, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and then also my newsletter, which is in the description. And so today is just really a community check-in, you guys, recapping the biggest changes with burnout in quarter one of 2025. So this year has been a lot. Um, I feel like what we experienced these first 3 months almost feels like what you would experience in 3 years. So I want to just go over what I've been seeing, whether in my personal circles or what I'm seeing in the news or what's trending, as to what people are really struggling with this quarter. So, the top stressors of quarter one, of course, the first is workplace changes. So, there were corporations and the federal government that have pretty much mandated people to come back into the workplace. And so, there has been just a rise in people struggling with getting back into the office. Some of the demands, and sometimes employers are being harder on their employees to actually come in the workplace. And so the moments that we had during the COVID pandemic and a year or two after, where things started to open up in terms of flexibility and opportunity to work in different ways, is now kind of reverting back to what it was before the pandemic happened. And a lot of people are really, really, really struggling with that. Also, in addition to coming back to the office and more pressures to perform in the workplace, there have also been cuts in different workplaces. So, I'm originally from the Washington, D.C. area, and so in that area, it's really propped up by a large government workforce. So there have been people who have lost their jobs, cutbacks in terms of funding, and all of those things create a more tense and stressful work experience. So those are some of the things that have happened in terms of the workplace. The next are recession predictions. So, actually, maybe this time last year or closer to January of 2024, I had already started seeing that we were in a recession. Now, it wasn't, said out loud, by government officials or people who were economists, but as someone who works in social work, you see people on the ground, like what people are dealing with. And last year, I started to see more people getting laid off, more people struggling with the rising cost of everyday living. And so last year, people tightened their wallets because they were seeing that things were changing economically. Well, now this year, they are finally saying that we are going to enter a recession, and some are saying by June of this year. However, I think it's already happening. They're just not declaring it. So with the recession predictions, people are more worried about their finances, and we know that in this country, economics are extremely important. If you don't have solid financial stability, it upends, just about every part of your life. So now I think that the financial and economic stresses are also happening, and it's making people either look for other work or trying to figure out what they're going to do to make ends meet because of the changing economic conditions. And then lastly, political turmoil and instability. I don't know if you're like me, but every time I even if I'm not trying to look at the news, there is some political change that drastically impacts our communities, right? And so the political turmoil since Trump got in office in January 2020, and it's only been 2 months. And the political turmoil and instability and chaos is making, everyone just a lot more stressed out and a lot more concerned about their future, and the future seems uncertain. So the political turmoil affects everything in our livelihoods. The government affects our livelihoods a lot more than I think people really realize. And then also how to engage civically, given how some of these changes that are happening are impacting our communities. So I'll just say, for example, today, I woke up and looked at the news, and it said that, the Trump administration has cut over, I think, $150 million from the state of Illinois in terms of their public funding for public health, right? So that's huge, right? Because I'm in social work, I'm in mental health, but that that political change and those cuts definitely will impact our communities, and also people who are working to make sure that our communities are healthy and strong. So, some of the common reactions to some of these stressors, of course, are anxiousness and worry. Um, there are many people who are very worried right now. Some people who are worried with things that are very immediate, and then there are anxiousness and worry about what's coming and what can happen in the future. The other is increased responsibility. So, um, there are people with this climate who are like, you know what, I'm going to have to take on more. And so those increased responsibilities add to more exhaustion and more pressure on a day-to-day basis. And so whether it's in the workplace, people taking on more responsibilities to cover for changes, in terms of staff, or if people at home are taking on more responsibility, there are just more people taking on more to be able to weather the storm. But of course, that leads to exhaustion, apathy, and burnout. Survival mode. I think there are plenty of folks who are in survival mode. How am I going to make ends meet? How am I going to be able to make it in this current environment? And so being in survival mode and that fight or flight produces a lot of tension and a lot of instability, and it doesn't allow our bodies and our minds to fully operate in its best capacity. And then lastly, action or inaction. So there are people who are seeing these changes happening and they want to take action. But then there are also people who are just really overwhelmed and are not taking action because of what taking action could mean for their well being. So there is definitely this dichotomy of people wanting to take action and people not taking action based on these changes that are happening. So, I want to talk about wellness tips going into this next quarter. So, we are about to go into quarter two, which is next week. And these are just some wellness tips that I want to offer you all to help us through this next season. We already seen what things could be looking like potentially, and there's a lot that we can learn from what we've experienced this first quarter. So, the first tip that I want to provide you with is to focus on what you can control. There are so many other things that are outside of our control that we cannot do anything about. But there is more power that we do have in things that are within our control that we can definitely try to maximize or take advantage of. So I can't control what happens at Congress, but I can control how I'm going to show up for my community given the changes that may happen. I might not be able to control, the economic situation, but I can control in the way that I spend or the way that I manage my finances based on the changing economics. The next is to be nimble and to be flexible. Whenever there is change or whenever there's a transition, the hardest part is adjusting to it. So I want you to think about ways that you can be nimble, you can be light on your feet, and you can be flexible. And the more flexible that we are in our actions and in our thinking, creates more opportunities and doesn't box us in with rigid ways of doing things that can make it harder to adjust to what we're experiencing right now. The next is just increasing your intention on your wellness. When I've worked with clients in the past for therapy, when things would intensify from a stress standpoint, I would also say this is an opportunity to increase your intention on your wellness. Our bodies, this is all we have. And so doing things that that center and take care of our well being on a regular basis is even more important during times of heightened stress and heightened anxiety. So whether that is, doing things like making your meals, going to, the gym, getting good sleep, just the very basic things that focus on your well-being is extremely important, and to be intentional about it. The next is focusing on enhancing relationships and community. Everybody's been talking about community this year and leaning into community, which I believe is always important, not just when shit hits the fan. But I want you to think about the relationships that you do have, that you value, that you enjoy, that are reciprocal, and focusing on those relationships, whether it's with family, friends, community, work. Focus on enhancing those relationships and also engaging in community, and not getting isolated. Because one thing, when we're burnout and stressed and we're isolated, it only makes it worse. So finding ways to engage with people in your community around some of the things that you're struggling with, but also around common interests and goals. And then lastly, please limit exposure to activating information. So if you know that when you look at the news, it activates you, if you listen to certain podcasts or certain commentators, if that really activates you, or even particular conversations, just limiting your exposure, just tuning into what you need to know, and not getting inundated with so much exposure to information that can be anxiety provoking, can be stressful, and can be activating or triggering. So these are my tips to support you all with going into quarter 2 of this year. Like I said, this year has been a lot. And so I wanted to take some time for us to just really check in and talk about what we're going through, what we're experiencing. If you have any questions or any thoughts, please feel free to put them in the comments. I know there are a couple people joining from Instagram, so I'll give you all a moment to do that. But this is going to be a challenging season. And so I want, as I come to you all every 2 weeks, to provide you with tools to be able to get through this period, but to also recognize things that are happening that are really shifting, our everyday lives. So thank you all so much for tuning in. So the next topic, which will be in 2 weeks, April 10th, I'm going to be talking about my top self-soothing practices for stress management. So April is Stress Management Awareness Month. So I'm going to be talking about my top self-soothing practices for when I've encountered stress and that I've seen other people benefit from, who I've worked with, in terms of soothing themselves when they encounter increased stress. So join me every other Thursday at 12 p.m. Central Time. Please like the video. Please share it with someone who you know of who is struggling in this season, who is struggling in quarter 1 and needs some inspiration and some tips. And then also please subscribe to the YouTube channel and then also my newsletter. And that information is in the description. I'll be dropping a newsletter tomorrow. recapping what I've talked about today, but then just other news and updates as it relates to burnout. So you all take care of all of you and be well.